Yeah, and to that point, I just looked it up real quick. Justin Fields ADP was 14th round, 15th round on this last year. He's getting kept 100%. But there's another quarterback right behind him that Tua Tagovailoa is going right after him. He might be available. What is up, guys? Today on the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show, we'll be identifying the best keeper values for 2023. So, how does that tie into Dynasty, and why should our Dynasty listeners keep listening to the show, Jeff?
So the biggest reason why, if you're a dynasty player, that you can gain from keeper value, and I've got a large article coming out here this week where I looked at last year's ADP in redraft and compared it to this year's ADP in redraft, looking for big value fluctuations. For keeper purposes, looking for players who increased value dramatically, because a lot of these leagues, you keep the value that you drafted a player last year, or there's different settings within that. But also, I think there's value to be added for dynasty players and really looking at the running backs. And I think that when you look at dynasty, you know that running backs have that cliff coming, but how profound the value loss was from last year when you look at running backs in redraft and identifying some of those. Maybe you feel good about a running back that might have a little bit of time, but that cliff comes earlier than what you realize. And so if you're not a real true contender in your dynasty league, this is the time of year I would be looking to pivot off of running backs and maybe tier down for a player who will still give you production, add younger assets, those types of moves. But it's a real key area right now on the calendar to move off of running backs, I believe, in Dynasty.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said. We're big on spotting trends, and I think it extends even further past running backs. Kyle Pitts is a name that we might discuss tonight. Because the value change from last year to this year is so drastic. And so when we talk about this compared to Dynasty, that doesn't necessarily show up in Dynasty ADP and how people view him in Dynasty. So just some discrepancies in redraft to Dynasty from year to year. I think it's key to identify those trends.
Yeah, and I do think that while we go through this, and we're going to go through the rounds and kind of talk about the cluster of players and all of that, I think that we can identify targets too on the trade market. And I do think that you can always find those targets, not so much as like, here is a dynasty trade show. Like, that's not what we're doing. We're going to dive into like, hey, based on the market and from what we're seeing, because I think the keeper values that you look out there, I think it's more reflective almost because the dynasty is less like 3 years out anymore. It's kind of redraft. Really, like it really is the way people play it. And so I think keeper kind of bridges that gap. So these values might be a little bit more truer than what you see on like, calculators or whatever the case may be out there that people use for dynasty. All right, let's get into it. So do you keep players in round one? So how does that work, Jeff, when you're looking at your keeper leagues? Overall, like the league design, how does that work when you're going into it?
I think ideally, my favorite keeper league that I've played in the past, you weren't able to keep players that were drafted in the first 2 rounds. That kind of kept value on first round picks or second round picks that might be traded. It also made the draft a little bit more interesting. You kind of keeping those elite players in the pool. But if you are in a league that does allow keepers to be taken in the first round, I think it's important to realize that the situations where you should keep a player in the first round are kind of few and far between, because when you got to look at the opportunity cost of what you're giving up in order to keep that player. And unless you have like the 112 and you've got Justin Jefferson on your roster and you just don't have another good keeper option, maybe your limit is 2, maybe it's 3, whatever it might be, that's maybe a scenario where I would think about Jefferson. But if you're anybody but him, I think that you're sacrificing, 1, the player that you would keep instead, the value that really you realize off that, but 2, the using that first round pick on an elite asset. And you can move through the end of the first round and you're still looking at players like CeeDee Lamb or Travis Kelce's in the middle of that first round. Bijan Robinson's coming to the league. There's a lot of talent in that first round. So to really give up that pick, it takes an extraordinary circumstance.
Yeah, I do personally think it extends beyond Jefferson, though, because for the example is if you're sitting at the 112 and you have Justin Jefferson, that's an auto keep, right? But then there's Travis Kelce. If you're sitting at the 112 and Travis Kelce is going at the 107, I think I'd consider something like that too. Same thing with like Christian McCaffrey, guys that didn't really move value a whole lot from last year to this year. There are a lot of leagues that don't let you keep players in the first couple of rounds. I was once in a league where I kept like 10 players, but it was one per position essentially, maybe two per position. But those leagues were fun because then you have different, a variety of different players in the first and second round and things like that. So every league is different. And we do want to preface with that. Obviously, your league rules dictate how you approach this, but this will give you hopefully some values and some advice on who to keep in your keeper leagues this year.
Yeah, I'd keep Chase. I feel like, I know I'm an outlier here, but Jamar and those guys in there, I think it really depends. I think Justin Jefferson and Jamar are in a tier to themselves in terms of that. Like, if you can, is there anybody? So going through that first round, Jeff, is anyone we want to highlight outside of Jefferson? That's it.
I just want to talk about some of the values that running backs lost, because last year, this time, people were taking Dalvin Cook, taking DeAndre Swift, taking Najee Harris even in the first round. And, Jonathan Taylor was the 101. And you look 1 year down the road, Dalvin Cook's on a new team. He's lost what we did this exercise here, looking at ADP last year to this year, lost 62 points of ADP. DeAndre Swift lost another new team, lost 56 places in ADP value from 1 year to the next. And so I just, again, underscoring, and DeAndre Swift was a player that in Dynasty people were very, very high on up until even at this point last year. And so seeing that loss immediately, I think really underlines that when you look at last year's first round, those are the big losers out of it.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I was just gonna kick in with Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't know what Jahmyr Gibbs' ADP is as of right now. I think we could push into some territory in certain leagues, but guys like that just simply won't be available in your keeper leagues. That you won't be able to keep them. You have to consider those opportunity costs here. And then when we're talking about the running backs, there are really two running backs that held value, and it was Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey. The interesting thing to me is Jonathan Taylor is one of those younger running backs that we expect to hold value. And even in Dynasty, we've seen that shift. And so it's just an interesting thing to look at when you actually have it sitting in front of you. I think, Jeff, I don't know if you said Jonathan Taylor lost 15 spots in ADP, and that might go down based on, the news coming out of Indianapolis right now.
I think based on that too, I think an underrated kind of dynasty trend that you could do is sell all your running backs early in the offseason for as much as you can get, and then just stack your team at the wide receiver position. And then as your season goes, depending on how your value is in your roster is, you can basically fill those dynasty rosters with replacement level running backs for pretty cheap. Look at Mixon. He came back to the Bengals. He's on that team. And you're like, hey, you probably could have grabbed him in the middle of the offseason for very cheap. And you're loading up on those other positions. So I think that is something to note too as well. Like, Eckler's probably not going to be on this list next year. If we do this show again next year, he'll probably be, I don't know, 30 to 40 ADP change, probably, maybe, depending on what happens this offseason, what it comes from. So I do think that is something to note as well.
Yeah, I agree. No, it's great.
All right. Yeah, we just raised our eyebrows at each other. That was cute. All right, before we move on, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Comment below with your questions, any recent trades or thoughts on the topic.
Also, make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a premium subscriber. Elite subscribers get custom Dynasty content for less than $15 monthly or $70 annually. Everyone who purchases a Football Guys subscription has 30 days from the date of purchase to request their money back if they are unsatisfied, but you will not be.
All right, let's look at round two. Just kind of generally speaking, the guys are going in there. I still think I want to highlight CeeDee Lamb. If he's going to go in that late first, early second round, I think that's a guy to note in your keeper leagues because I do think that he's a value in this kind of a format. I still think he's a value out there. Mark Andrews is a guy. He lost ADP change as well, but where I think he's going to have a big year in the offense that he's in. So that's something to note there. I know Christian mentioned Kyle Pitts, so let's talk about Kyle Pitts, Christian. What do you want to talk about with him?
Well, from last year to this year, he lost 48 spots in ADP. The breakout didn't really happen. And so the reason I brought that name up, though, is in Dynasty, we haven't really seen that shift. And you do wonder, I think Dave Kluge just made a nice case. I saw a video on the Football Guys Twitter about a breakout for Kyle Pitts this year. And you wonder if keeping him, if this is an extended, like you can keep for 2 to 3 years, if that's how your league is set up, if keeping him relative to I know the ADP doesn't suggest it, but maybe that's more of a dynasty investment, more of a long-term outlook. I know there's potential that you have to give up this second round pick and you could potentially get Kyle Pitts later, but that's kind of the balance you have to have in keeper leagues where you're running the risk of then losing Kyle Pitts. And if you believe in that 2023 breakout, sometimes it's okay to reach on ADP, based on what your thoughts are. So that's the reason I wanted to highlight Kyle Pitts. I think that it's tough for me to see him, reaching the second round next year. But if that breakout happens, he could be in that Kelsey, Andrews type of tier. And so this could be a good value. It just might be a year away before you recognize that value.
Yeah, and I think that one of the big things that I like to underscore is uncertainty and bet on players who are talented, because when you look at this round, Tyreek Hill had a 24 overall ADP last year, and even moving on to the next round, AJ Brown had a 30 overall ADP last year, and people were very concerned about how are these offenses going to work? How is it going to look with Tyreek Hill leaving Patrick Mahomes and going to play with Tua Tagovailoa in Miami? Or how is it going to look with AJ Brown going and playing with Jalen Hurts? And so if you had bet on those situations and on those talent, you would be reaping big value both in your dynasty leagues right now and in your redraft leagues right now. And so I think it's important to a lot of narratives, and it's interesting that when you dive into ADP, because there's a lot of talk about big wide tiers in different areas, and especially in the wide receiver area right now, a big wide tier. But really, when you look and identify those players that have the talent, that have produced in the past, that maybe are being faded for situations that maybe we're just wrong on. And that's one of the big things. I think, like, I'm looking at Tampa Bay. Like, Chris Godwin is a player that, and even Mike Evans to an extent, I think that they are major fades across the industry. But we're seeing last year, we saw the Seattle wide receivers have huge fades, and Geno Smith turned out better than what we thought. With the announcement today that Baker Mayfield is going to be the starting quarterback for the Buccaneers, I mean, I think that being so certain on how the production is going to work out is an area that I think you can target and reap a lot of value out of.
Yeah, we could probably clip Kyle Pitts' take that Christian just had and play it next year, because we're all going to be disappointed again because Arthur Smith and his inability to get his best playmakers the ball. But maybe we're right? Maybe we are there. I do think it is something, though, that you could give him back and get him back maybe in the fourth round. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to reach in the second. You could reach probably in the fourth just based on this ADP that's here. So that is something to note there. I do like the Tyreek Hill point. I think that's his. I will say Leonard Fournette dropped 152 spots in his ADP, that is the biggest drop. I'm pretty sure. I'm not good at math, as you guys that listened to the show last week, but that is one of the bigger drops that we have seen of this group. So that is also there. Round 3, when you're going into this, one thing that stood out to me was Chubb. So I know we highlighted Chubb as well. He did go up. He went up 15 spots, Nick Chubb. And I do think he's going to have a big year, but he is one of the biggest massive sells to me in Dynasty, at least, just looking at this, because especially if your team is borderline. But in redraft, I mean, you have to pretty much, when you're looking at this, you're going to keep them, which is fine in the third round. You're getting kind of like a first round talent early second, which is not bad. I think that is a good play in a keeper league. But in Dynasty, this does show me that he's still getting value pretty high, and it might be time to kick the tires, because that cliff is coming.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. And one of the things that you don't know when it's coming for sure. And so, again, like, you might be wrong. And again, I flash back to DeAndre Swift last year. That's a player that was going first round ADP. And he was in most rankings was a top 10 dynasty running back. In just 1 year, it just turned into a massive fade.
Yeah. I did hear some positive news on Nick Chubb. The news is that they're not going to forget that they have Nick Chubb in Cleveland. They're going to remember that, and they are still going to give him the ball. So I think too, it's interesting to see the value boost for him, because I felt like this happened last year too, but it wasn't really reflected in ADP. I think people were a little more cautious with Jacoby Brissett having the team for most of the year. Turns out that was the best weeks for Nick Chubb last year. So and then amongst this group as well as AJ Brown, like Jeff said, those are two just screaming values in this round. And if you have the ability to keep one of those two players in round 3, that would be great value. Do that.
Which one of these guys do you think DJ Moore is good at where his value is right now? So DJ Moore dropped 17 spots. He's still going about ADP 50. So, 5th round ish, I think 5th round in that area. Jeff, are you in on that?
Yeah, I'm very much in on DJ Moore. He's one of my most rostered players. I wrote the DJ Moore spotlight this year, and it's fun because a lot of what I wrote in that spotlight that was published back in June has really come in already to play. We see it in camp, and when one of the things on the Bears, their defense is going to be bad, and so they're going to be forced to throw, and so DJ Moore is going to be that massive target hog, I believe, for the Bears, and I think he's going to reap a lot of fantasy value because there's a lot of people. It's DJ Moore has always been one of those polarizing players that people really believe in him, or people kind of see like, well, he's just kind of a high-end wide receiver 2 on production. But I do think that this year is the year that he could kind of break that threshold and be a wide receiver 1. But it's kind of one of those things we talk about with Tyreek Hill, we talk about with AJ Brown, where the talent's there, people are fading the situation because they believe Justin Fields can't throw. And that's exactly the type of scenario where if you're grabbing DJ Moore in your 5th round, he turns out the way that you're hoping to see, and you've got a great 5th round keeper next year.
Yeah. I have a question. So round 4. So as we dive into round 4, kind of look at these guys. The big value highlights that we have is Josh Allen. He changed about 17 spots from 39 to 22. Jaylen Waddle as well. And that's that situation talent thing. And Waddle, we've all been big fans of Waddle, so that's a big one there. When do you keep a quarterback, Christian? Are you taking Josh Allen at this point because he did jump up? Or are you going to wait a little later for some other guys that we're going to get like Mahomes and Lamar and those guys?
That is a great question because my strategy always in keeper leagues is to take a quarterback late when I'm drafting so that I have an opportunity for a screaming value later, especially if I'm only giving up that round pick. I had a buddy reach out to me about a Deshaun Watson keeper. He drafted him in the 15th round last year because it was a keeper league and the keeper rules say you just give up the round ahead of you. That is a very good strategy, and that's something that I would recommend. And if I were faced with the decision between Josh Allen or Jaylen Waddle in round 4, I would very much so prefer to keep Jaylen Waddle, and then hopefully the quarterback I picked hit. That would be like I would have taken Justin Fields sometime last year. If you guys know me, you know that that's pretty obvious, but I would have then kept Justin Fields and then had Justin Fields and Jaylen Waddle at a value that you're looking at Justin Fields around that area, maybe not that early, but that's just the strategy I would implement.
Yeah, and I think there are really 2 key parts about the quarterback conversation right now. And the first one is how much I think we talked about, you have a big tier of players. Really, when you get into that 3rd round, that 4th round, you're kind of feeling like you're drafting the same guy, whether it is the 3rd round, 4th round. And traditionally, quarterbacks have been kind of pushed to the back of that. The elite quarterbacks are kind of held on the back of that. But I think what you've seen this year is quarterbacks pushed to the front of that because people are saying, well, if I can get roughly the same player in round 4, round 5 as what I'm going to take in the 3rd, well, then just give me Patrick Mahomes or give me Josh Allen. I've got an elite player that I'm putting on my quarterback position. He's giving me that ceiling to be 25, 30, 35 points every single week. And so to add that ceiling and then still roughly get similar production in the 4th and 5th round, instead of like previously, the way that it was treated was those guys would be more 4th or 5th round picks that we're seeing here. The other thing too is if you want those elite quarterbacks, the value that has been realized off of those guys, a lot of those guys might end up kept. Like Jalen Hurts is almost certainly going to be kept in your league. Justin Fields is almost certainly going to be kept in your league. Trevor Lawrence might be. Even Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen might be kept in your league. So you might not even have that chance to grab the elite quarterbacks. They just might all be off the board. And that's one of the key things as you're in a keeper league. And one of the biggest things I believe in a keeper league is map out what your opponents are going to do and use that to affect your strategy. If you're somebody that you're holding, maybe you're holding Josh Allen here in round 4, and you're looking at your strategy and you're saying, okay, well, I know Hurts is going to be off the board. Patrick Mahomes is going to be off the board. And this is really my only opportunity to grab an elite quarterback. That sways your decision, whether or not maybe you've got a Ramondre Stevenson in round 6, 7, 8, or you've got Josh Allen in round 4, and you're saying, well, this is my only shot here to get an elite quarterback. And you can go Christian's route and be a little bit risky on it on the back end. But if you want that production, know where they're going to land and realize that when you step into your draft, if you've been playing in multiple years, but if this is your first year, how depleted that draft is going to be. And so you might see Josh Allen be a 2nd round pick or even a mid 2nd round pick in your draft once those keeper talent get taken out of it.
Yeah, and to that point, I just looked it up real quick. Justin Fields ADP was 14th round, 15th round on this last year. He's getting kept 100%. But there's another quarterback right behind him that Tua Tagovailoa is going right after him. He might be available. Like that might be someone that just says, I don't want to take Tua. I'm worried about the injury, because what we think of Tua is different when the market thinks. I think from the casual kind of keeper player or anybody like that, I could see them maybe moving on from Tua because of last year, how it played out. So that's just an option. That's just some ideas and some targets for you guys later that you're like, oh yeah, I can kind of attack that. I will say I laugh at Dalton Schultz's ADP. He lost 71. Yeah, I don't know who was drafting Dalton Schultz in the 4th round. If you were, shame on you. All right, round 5 and 6. Let's kind of go through here. There's some highlighted players here. DK Metcalf, he's jumped up, which is interesting in my opinion. He 21 ADP change, even with JSN there. I know he just had to have surgery, but that is kind of interesting there to me. Amon-Ra is a screaming value in terms of where his ADP's at. He's gone up 41. TJ Hawkinson as well in terms of where that. And Josh Jacobs is probably the one guy. Are you comfortable keeping Josh at his ADP right now? Do you think he's going to play the full year, Jeff?
I feel a lot better keeping Josh in the 5th round than taking Josh in the 2nd or 1st round.
Yeah,
that worries me. I mean, the story came out yesterday that he was going to report to camp, and then there was some iffiness around that. There was a tweet that there was a reply from his account that said, "Oh, I said that," and he deleted it quickly. And then I think the other thing to kind of keep in your mind on Josh Jacobs is he going to just kind of get those 6 games to clip off a year of eligibility and hit another free agent cycle? I think that those are real legitimate concerns. But Metcalf last year was the situation around Geno Smith and the big fade on the Seahawks. And I do want to take a quick moment to note where these values are coming from. So the 2022 value is from FFPC drafts that were done last year. The 2023 ADP is from Football Guys. We have a consensus ADP that pulls sites across the industry. And so if you're saying, well, this is wildly different than the ADP and ESPN that I use, yeah, that might be because this is a consensus ADP, whereas last year it was the FFPC value, and we don't really have the consensus last year to kind of, it's not exactly apples to oranges, but we're getting roughly in the ballpark is our goal right now.
Yeah, I think too. So to your Jacobs point, as the running back guy of this show, the guy that's still comfortable with running backs in all formats, I still would prefer not to, use my keeper on a running back, even with this good of a value. I've spoken about it, but I do think Josh Jacobs has an elite level workload once he's back. It's just, I think there's going to be a ramp up period there. And then you're going to be kind of disappointed if Amon-Ra St.Brown recovers from his injury. He goes out week 1 and scores 25 fantasy points. And that was the opportunity cost there. I think too, it depends on format, but TJ Hawkinson, if you are playing in a tight end premium league, I think that's a really good value in this area, but certainly less likely to keep a running back based on what we just saw with those 1st rounders, those 2nd rounders, and how they fall off in value so quickly.
Yeah. Now, as we dive into round 6 from last year, when you're looking at that, some values out there. Patrick Mahomes, he's gone up a lot, 48 spots there. I cannot believe you were getting Patrick Mahomes in round 6 last year. Congrats to you. Amari Cooper as well. Lamar Jackson at 69 really feels like a smash to me. Like I'm keeping Lamar in all formats. To me, I think that offense has shown it moving up. And even then, he's only getting late 3rd or 4th in terms of what that is. But if you only have to give up a 6th round, I'm on board with that. Sometimes you have to give up the 5th. I still be okay with getting Lamar there. Anybody stand out to you in this round, Jeff?
It's just underlining again the change in quarterback value and the change in the way that quarterbacks are being treated in this year's draft relative to last year's drafts.
Yeah, I think, and there's a reason for that. And we've kind of seen that reflected in Dynasty too, and how, people are valuing those top end quarterbacks a bit higher and then pushing some unknowns up because they think that they can get into that tier. One other note from this group, don't keep Zach Ertz. He dropped 139 spots, and don't draft Zach Ertz in round 6 in your redraft leagues this year or your Dynasty leagues. Definitely don't do it there.
That's the kind of advice you come for on this show. So make sure you hit that like button. And if you're listening on the podcast, leave us a review, please. Say don't draft Zach Ertz in the 6th round. If you do that, you'll get a surprise. I don't know. Jeff will send you something. He's the rich one. All right, let's look at round 7 and kind of go through some clusters real quick. Big cluster for me in this round 7. Tony Pollard, Miles Sanders, Drake London, and Jalen Hurts are sitting there in the 7th round. Tony Pollard, I mean, it looks like he's fighting against Deuce Vaughn and some of these other running backs, Rico Dowdle and some of these other guys in there. Like that feels like, going for it type play, keeping Pollard there at that ADP. Right now he's going in like the 2nd round. I don't mind kind of taking a shot on Pollard if he's going to get that usage that you like to see there. Anybody else or Pollard stand out to you, Jeff?
The biggest things here, London, the rookie. And so rookies are filled with this. And a lot of that is the strength of the 2022 class. And so I think it's important, one, to target rookies, especially in keeper formats. But 2, you need to recognize that ADP has shifted dramatically on rookies. And a lot of these guys, you're seeing them go off the board. Like you saw Garrett Wilson I think he was like 108 or something last year. And Garrett Wilson was 118 last year. And Chris Olave was 102 last year. Drake London was 80 last year. And now you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, who just had the wrist injury. We'll see where that flushes out. You've got Jordan Addison. You've got even Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnson to a lesser extent are going at higher ADPs than where Garrett Wilson went last year. And that was Garrett Wilson as a top 10 pick last year. These guys were in the 20s. And so the value that you can realize off rookies is important in keepers, but you need to recognize that the consensus has shifted on those and those have gotten pushed up. And so it might be a situation where you might be caught holding the bag maybe on some of these rookies where you're not getting the redraft production and you're kind of questioning next year if you're going to be realizing that value off that. A situation like Sky Moore, who amazingly has a lower ADP in this than what he did last year, despite so much positive camp buzz coming into it.
Sorry about that. That I probably contributed to that. No, I think it's important too to note that there were a few options to keep in those early rounds. These mid rounds are where you should attack your keepers. This is the value can be had all really from the 5th round on is when I think you're getting the best values. To the Tony Pollard point, I think I just talked about not keeping running backs, but when there is such a vast discrepancy like this, going and getting a 2nd round player all the way in round 7, that's the type of move that could win you a league. On the other side of things, there could be some enticement to keep those rookies. Like Jeff kind of just mentioned, like you could get caught holding the bag. I could also see a world in which Drake London's a 3rd or 4th round pick this year. I know he's pushing that already, but I could see a world where Drake London vaults up even more next year. And so I think that that's something to consider as well. You have to kind of approach this with a little bit of a dynasty outlook. And if you have a 3-year keeper mentality, Pollard might not be the best option here. You might want to roll with Drake London.
Yeah, and I do want to mention how many keeper options are popping up in this round. I think you made a good point on that because you're running in a situation where it's almost half of these guys turned out to be good keepers. And so that's something to keep in mind that as you have potential trades. And so looking at potential keeper trades, if you're in a situation where maybe you can only keep three players and you've got 4 great keepers, you need to be looking around your league mates and seeing who does not have a strong 3rd keeper and do some of those deals where maybe you're moving your 10th round pick up into the 8th round and you're giving them a keeper that you wouldn't be able to keep otherwise. And you're getting into this round, these area that you can reap a lot of value, both in production this year, but then also keeper value next year.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think so too. And now let's get through here really quick and kind of go rapid fire. Round 8, I mean, we're also diving into kind of that same thing. Devonta Smith sitting there, Ramondre Stevenson, Joe Burrow, Kenneth Walker, I think is an interesting one because of Charbonnet being there and Walker still kind of dealing with that. But yeah, I mean, you're looking at legitimate value in those areas there. And the way you can build around it, you can. I mean, there's probably some teams out there going to keep Justin Fields for 14th, 15th round and going to get Devonta or Ramondre here in the 8th. Like there is value as you go through here. here. Of the final rounds, I'll just kick it to you guys, kind of go rapid fire, pick some guys out that you like. Dameon Pierce is an interesting one. I have a hard time keeping Dameon Pierce, even at his value now at 52. I mean, I get at 103, you're getting a pretty good value in terms of where he was going. But overall, what are some guys that stand out to you as we kind of wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at round 9. You've got Chris Olave and Rashad White went in round 9. Really quick point on just the amount of running backs that changed their situation one year to the next. You see a lot of talented young running backs that were later redraft picks last year, and now that situation has cleared out in front of them in just 1 year, and now they are dramatically higher values.
Yeah, I mean, I just talked about how all of these rounds are loaded with values, but it does start to kind of taper off a bit. I do want to make it a point to talk about Christian Kirk on every show from now on. Christian Kirk's a good value up there in round 8 as well. But there are just so many good values from rounds 5 through 8, and then you get into round 9, you're getting there. Round 10, Alexander Madison, Garrett Wilson. I'd be hesitant on the Madison thing personally a little bit. Don't keep James Robinson there. 207. That's the biggest change that we've seen. He was getting drafted in round 10 last year. But overall, I mean, I think your money rounds are those mid rounds.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize contextually how much talent gets depleted out of keeper drafts too, because if you got 3 players kept, you're looking at 36 players that are really good values that are going to be kept out of your league. And so I think looking through this, you really saw talent start to fall off around pick 80-ish or so. And so if you're talking about 36 good values being out, and then you're looking at that, maybe that 8th round, that 7th round, kind of edges its way up into that 5th and 6th round. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. But I do want to mention the Football Guys Draft Dominator is great because you can do keepers on the Football Guys Draft Dominator. You can load your league in on the Draft Dominator, set the keepers for every team where you think that they'll end up in your league, and the Draft Dominator will create cheat sheets and show you what's going to be depleted out of the draft, who's going to be left in the quarterback pool, who's going to be left in the tight end pool, where you want to target and go in different directions. And you can really be proactive and map out a keeper league much more so than a regular redraft league.
For sure. All right. That'll do it. The full version of this show and every show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying the show, head to your favorite podcast app and subscribe to the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show.